Today marked my first morning at the Harringtons, my new home after marrying Alex. The wedding and honeymoon seemed like a dream, but the reality was about to hit hard. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington," I greeted, my voice a mix of nervousness and excitement. No response came. I repeated a bit louder this time, "I hope I didn't wake you by coming down so early." Mrs. Harrington, standing by the stove, continued her cooking as if I weren't there. I felt a lump in my throat but brushed it off as early morning aloofness. However, when she finally spoke, her words cut through the morning silence like a knife. "In this house, we rise before dawn. You slept in, and that's not how we do things here." Her tone was icy, her back still turned to me. I was taken aback. I just thought," I stammered, but she interrupted me. "And don't expect to be waited on. Here, you earn your keep. Starting tomorrow, you'll handle breakfast and laundry." Her words were sharp, leaving no room for discussion. As I processed this, Sarah, Alex's sister, sauntered in, her eyes scanning me with unveiled disdain. "Looks like the princess finally woke up. Mom, I hope you didn't let her off easy." Mrs. Harrington smirked. "Oh, she's learning. From tomorrow, she'll know her place." I stood there, dumbfounded, my heart sinking. Where was the warm, welcoming family I'd imagined, the loving mother-in-law who'd embraced me during our wedding? Alex, who'd been my rock, was nowhere in sight. I felt a deep, unsettling loneliness creeping in. The vibrant colors of my new life were starting to fade, replaced by the gray shades of a harsh reality. As the day progressed, the cold treatment continued. Whispered conversations halted as I entered rooms, and glares followed me around like shadows. It was as if I had become an intruder in my own home. That night, lying beside Alex, I whispered, "Your mom and Sarah, they seem different. Did I do something wrong?" Alex shifted uncomfortably. "They just need time to adjust. You know how family is. It'll get better." But as I closed my eyes, a sinking feeling told me it wouldn't. I was trapped in a home that felt more like a prison, with wardens watching my every move. This wasn't the family life I had dreamed of. It was a waking nightmare, and I had willingly walked into it. 3 years. That's how long it took for my dream to turn into a daily nightmare. Each day at the Harringtons was a repetition of the last, a relentless cycle of chores, criticism, and cold shoulders. The vibrant woman I once was had faded, leaving behind a shadow, constantly trying to please an unpleasable family. Mrs. Harrington's voice echoed through the house, a constant reminder of my supposed inadequacies. "Anna, the floors aren't clean enough. Anna, this food is bland." Her words were like thorns, pricking away at my confidence. One evening, as I scrubbed the kitchen floor, exhausted from the day's work, Mrs. Harrington stood over me. "You know, I always told Alex he could do better. A woman who can't even keep a house isn't worth much." Her words stung, but I bit back the tears. I had learned that showing weakness only fueled her disdain. Even Alex, the man I thought I knew, had become a stranger. His once warm gaze turned indifferent, his whispers of love replaced by silence or curt nods in agreement with his mother and sister. Sarah, ever the instigator, seemed to delight in my misery. "Look at you, playing housemaid. Did you ever imagine this would be your life, Anna?" Her laughter was a bitter sound that resonated in the emptiness of my heart. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but fear and a sense of defeat had taken hold of me. It wasn't just the constant belittling. My world outside these walls had shrunk too. Friends had stopped calling, and my family, distant to begin with, remained oblivious to my plight. The breaking point came unexpectedly. After years of trying, I discovered I was pregnant, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark existence. But even this news was met with scorn. "A child? You think you can be a mother? You can't even manage simple housework," Mrs. Harrington sneered the day I shared the news. Alex's reaction was no better. "A baby, huh? Well, let's hope you're better at parenting than being a wife." Their words were a crushing blow, extinguishing the last ember of joy I had felt. As my pregnancy progressed, so did the abuse. Sleepless nights, endless work, and the constant stress took a toll on my health. But I endured, for the tiny life growing inside me. One particularly harsh morning, as I battled morning sickness and fatigue, Mrs. Harrington's voice cut through the air. "Hurry up with breakfast. We can't all laze around just because you're pregnant." That moment, something inside me snapped. I was not going to let my child be born into this cycle of hatred and disrespect. I needed to escape. But how? The news of my father's sudden passing came as a shock. Amidst the grief, a sliver of hope emerged in the form of a letter from my father's lawyer, Mr. Edwards. The letter revealed an unexpected inheritance. $2 million left to me, his only child. When I broke the news to the Harringtons, their reaction was a grotesque display of greed masked as concern. Mrs. Harrington's eyes, usually so cold, now gleamed with avarice. "Oh, Anna, we're so sorry for your loss. But look at this blessing you've received. We're family. We'll help you manage this." Alex, too, was suddenly attentive, his indifference replaced by an eagerness I hadn't seen in years. "Anna, this is great news. We can use this money to make our lives so much better." Their transparent overtures of affection repulsed me. For 3 years I had been nothing but a burden, an unwelcome addition. Now, with money in the picture, I was suddenly valuable. Sarah's sly grin as she whispered, "Looks like you're not so useless after all," was the final straw. Their true colors, so vividly exposed, fueled a fire within me. I had to act, and act fast. I met with Mr. Edwards, who, unlike the Harringtons, expressed genuine sympathy for my loss. He advised me on securing the inheritance and, sensing my desperation, offered a plan. "You don't have to live like this, Anna. There are ways to protect yourself and your child." The plan was risky, but clear. I would quietly set up a separate account for the inheritance, ensuring it remained solely under my name. Then, with Mr. Edwards' help, I would prepare for a life away from the Harringtons. The following weeks were a blur. Amidst the usual torment at home, I worked closely with Mr. Edwards, gathering evidence of the Harringtons' abuse and securing my financial independence. The day I received the inheritance was a turning point. As I watched the numbers reflect in my account, a sense of empowerment washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of control over my destiny. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a silent vow. I would leave this house of horrors, take my child, and never look back. The Harringtons, with their fake concern and greed, would get what they deserved. But first, I had to play the part a little longer. The morning I decided to leave the Harringtons was unusually quiet. The house, which had been my prison for the last 3 years, felt eerily still as I packed my belongings. Each item I placed in my suitcase was a step closer to freedom, a silent rebellion against the life I was leaving behind. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was a shadow of her former self, but her eyes burned with a determination that had been absent for far too long. Downstairs, I found Mrs. Harrington in her usual spot, brewing her morning tea. Her voice was smug as she spoke without looking at me. "I heard you moving around early today. Finally, taking your responsibilities seriously, are you?" I forced a smile. "Yes, Mrs. Harrington. I realized I need to do better." Her laugh was a harsh sound that filled the room. "Well, it's about time. Maybe there's hope for you yet." Little did she know the hope was for a life without her. As I made breakfast, my hands shook with a mix of fear and excitement. Today I would reclaim my life. Alex was oblivious as he ate, scrolling through his phone. "You seem different today," he said, not bothering to look up. "I'm just trying to be a better wife and mother," I replied, my voice steady. The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary. After breakfast, I waited for Alex to leave for work. The moment the door closed behind him, I made my move. I had arranged for Mr. Edwards to send a car, which was now waiting discreetly down the street. I took one last look at the house, a symbol of my suffering, and walked out the door without a backward glance. The ride to Mr. Edwards' office was a blur. My heart raced with every mile we put between me and the Harringtons. Mr. Edwards was waiting, his expression one of concern and support. "You've made a brave decision, Anna. We'll take care of everything from here." He had already prepared the divorce papers and a restraining order against the Harringtons. I signed each document with a sense of finality, severing the ties that had bound me. As I left his office, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I was free, but this was just the beginning. The Harringtons had to pay for what they put me through, and I would make sure of it. Life outside the Harringtons' grasp was liberating, yet daunting. The world seemed vast and unfamiliar, but I was determined to rebuild what I had lost. My first few weeks of freedom were spent in a small apartment, the quiet a stark contrast to the constant criticism and chaos of my former life. I often found myself flinching at shadows, half expecting Mrs. Harrington's scathing remarks or Sarah's mocking laughter. But as days turned into weeks, The fear slowly ebbed away, replaced by a growing resolve for justice. Mr. Edwards had been my unwavering ally, guiding me through the legal process. "The evidence you've gathered over the years is substantial," he said during one of our meetings. "It's time to turn the tables on the Harringtons." The lawsuit was our first strike. Armed with years of documented abuse and financial exploitation, we filed against the Harringtons. The news of the lawsuit hit them like a bombshell. I imagined Mrs. Harrington's shock, her facade of control crumbling as she read the legal notice. I pictured Alex's disbelief, realizing that the submissive wife he had taken for granted was now his adversary. The court proceedings were a whirlwind. The Harringtons' attempts to discredit me fell flat against the overwhelming evidence. Mrs. Harrington's usual commanding presence was reduced to a defeated slouch, her eyes avoiding mine. Sarah's arrogance had vanished, replaced by a sullen, resentful glare. And Alex, he looked lost, the reality of losing the inheritance and facing legal repercussions finally dawning on him. The verdict was a victory sweeter than I had dared hope for. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me a significant settlement and full custody of my unborn child. The Harringtons were also ordered to pay damages for the years of emotional and psychological abuse. As I left the courtroom, I felt an unfamiliar sensation: empowerment. I had faced my oppressors and emerged victorious. In the weeks that followed, the Harringtons' misfortune continued. Alex lost his job due to the negative publicity, and their financial woes were compounded by the settlement. The once proud and affluent family was now mired in scandal and debt. I heard whispers about their struggles, about how they had to sell the house to pay off their debts. The irony wasn't lost on me. The home that had been my prison was now gone, just like their hold over me. I would sometimes pass by the old neighborhood, glancing at the for sale sign where the Harringtons' house once stood, a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes could change. In those moments, I realized the extent of my transformation. I was no longer the timid, broken woman they had tried to mold me into. I was Anna, a survivor, a fighter, and a mother. As I cradled my newborn son, Leo, in my arms, I whispered promises of a better life, free from fear and full of love, the life we both deserved. In the small, cozy office of my new job, I paused to reflect on the whirlwind that had been my life for the past few years. The sound of laughter from my colleagues in the background was a far cry from the oppressive silence of the Harringtons' house. I had started afresh in a new city, finding employment in a firm that valued my skills and experience. The memories of the Harringtons' abuse, though still vivid, no longer held power over me. One afternoon, as I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made my heart skip a beat: "Local family arrested for fraud and embezzlement." The accompanying photo showed the Harringtons being led away in handcuffs. As I read the article, a sense of finality washed over me. In their desperation for money after losing everything, the Harringtons had resorted to illegal activities, which ultimately led to their downfall. Their once proud name was now synonymous with disgrace and criminality. I couldn't help but feel a bitter satisfaction. The universe had a way of balancing the scales, and the Harringtons were paying the price for their cruelty and greed. My phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Mr. Edwards, calling with an update on the final legal proceedings. "Anna, it's over. The Harringtons have been found guilty. In addition to their criminal charges, they're also liable for additional damages to you. This is more than just a legal victory. It's justice." His words were a confirmation of what I had already known deep down. I had won, not just in the courtroom, but in life. I had escaped the clutches of a toxic family and rebuilt myself from the ground up. As I hung up the phone, I looked at the photo of Leo on my desk. My son, now a bubbly toddler, was the embodiment of my new life, full of joy, love, and hope. The journey had been harrowing, but it led me to a place of strength and independence. The Harringtons had sought to break me, but in the end, they only broke themselves. I turned my gaze outside the window, watching the city bustle below. Life moved on, and so had I. The scars of the past would always be a part of me, but that they no longer defined me. I was Anna, a survivor, a mother, and a woman reborn, and a woman reborn, and a woman